if 25 years ago we invested at a $5 million valuation, hoping the company could be worth 500, in which case we would make 20 or 30 times our money. It wasn't 100 times because of dilution from showing all that equity. Fast forward to today, they might invest at a $50 million valuation after the market has been proven. But the markets are so much bigger because of the internet, the reach is so much greater, that as many companies are worth 5 billion today as worth 500 million 25 years ago.
My name is Kevin David, and if you want real financial freedom for yourselves and for your loved ones today, then the time is now. And I will be there to help you every step of the way. What is up, guys, and welcome back to another exciting episode. Today we have a guest that I am actually most excited about in a very, very long time. Before we get into that, thank you to everybody who's been leaving us reviews on iTunes, commenting on YouTube. We just started launching it on our 1.4 million subscriber YouTube channel as well, so make sure you check it out there. So today we have Andy Rachleff joining us, who has one of the most impressive, entrepreneurial resumes that I think I've ever seen in my entire life. We're going to go into that. So Andy, the first question that we ask everybody on the podcast, and this might be tough for you, is to describe your entrepreneurial journey all the way up until right now in 60 seconds or less.
Okay, well, I don't consider my venture capital background as entrepreneurial. So I started Wealthfront by accident. I had retired from Benchmark, and while sitting on the University of Pennsylvania Endowment Investment Board, heard them talking about how they invest. And it just struck me that if you did that in software, you could democratize access to sophisticated investment management. And I thought I was focused on social good, so I needed to do that. I didn't want to do that.
I love it. And you're being very modest, right? Because I'm going to give everybody a little bit of context. While you were a part of Benchmark, right, I'm just going to name a couple of investments that I see. In 97, you guys invested $6.7 million for 22% of a little company that most people have heard of called eBay. Also in 2011, $12 million for an 11% stake in Uber that now is worth many, many, many billions of dollars. So while that might to you not be directly entrepreneurship, right, venture capital still is an incredible business. How did you get started with Benchmark? How did you find your co-founders? Like, what did that process look like?
Well, I had been in the venture capital business for 12 years prior to the founding of Benchmark. My partner, Bruce Dunleavy, and I came from a firm called Merrill, Pickard, Anderson, and Iyer, which was one of the premier firms. And Bob Cagle came from TVI, which was one of the premier firms. And both of those venture capital firms had gone through generational transitions where the founding partner wanted to retire. And that meant that the remaining partners could have either taken those franchises forward, or we could have wound down those funds and started new ones. And from those two firms actually came three. So Benchmark was created as a result of those transitions, another firm called Foundation Capital, and then a last one called August Capital. But fortunately, you know Benchmark the best of those three.
I'm always so interested too, because like with very independently successful, strong-minded people, sometimes like those are the people you want, right? But sometimes like those personalities are a little bit too extroverted and don't always get along kind of focusing on one goal. Like, how did you actually decide with those other people that you were all going to do something together rather than like, each trying to be a leader of their own thing?
Sure. Well, the thing that brought us together was a desire to build the best firm in the business. So we cared a lot more about that than we did making money. The money we figured would flow if we were able to build the premier firm in the business. So we were riveted on that. And in order to do that, we wanted to take the advice that we gave to our portfolio companies, which is turn your biggest competitors' strengths into their biggest weaknesses, jujitsu. And so at the time, the number one venture capital firm by far was Kleiner Perkins, Caulfield and Byers. And they had the best venture capitalist in the history of the business, John Doerr. And
Right.
Many entrepreneurs were disappointed if they couldn't get John Doerr, even though his partners were very, very good. So we figured the only way to beat them was to apply team to outdo individual. So what we created was something unique that still people don't emulate, which amazes me, which is an always equal partnership. And we figured it was an intelligence test for a great new partner to join us. Would you rather join us as an equal partner or someone else as a junior partner? And that way we could always attract really great talent. It's a professional service. And if you get better talent, you should have better outcomes. Right. Well, in order to buy, so you have to buy into the fact that it's an always equal partnership, and that even if your returns are better than your partners, you're not going to be able to ask for more of the economics. Right. And the original 5 people all bought into this. We spent a lot of time talking about it. We thought it was our biggest advantage. The limited partners didn't want to hear about it in our presentation. They said, yeah, let's get onto your investment strategies. We said, no, if you don't understand the benefits of the equal partnership, you don't understand what we're trying to do. And Benchmark is now on its 3rd generation of partners. All the founders have retired, and they just keep getting better and better because this equal partnership thing is a fundamentally better architecture.
So like the equal partnership thing, and I don't want to try to oversimplify this, right? But I've talked to other, ultra successful people on the podcast, and I keep hearing this recurring pattern. Part of it for me is kind of like hearing patterns amongst very successful people. One of the things that people continue to say that's a very obvious pattern to me is the people that you work with, right, must have skin in the game and proper incentivization to really kind of like pour their heart and soul into the work. And the only way to do that is something similar to like a profit share and equity and equal partnership. So when you bring on new people, or in the past when you did you equally dilute each member to make it equal again when a new person came?
Yes, and the only way that you can keep doing that in perpetuity is the old people have to leave. And they have to give up their equity, which is not the norm in the investment business. The norm in the investment business is the founder wants to keep equity in the investment firm to compensate them for having created the business. Think of it as goodwill. And having been through 2 firms that went through generational transition, we knew that that's how you kill a business. And we wanted to create something that worked for generations. So we all agreed up front that if any of us were not willing to go 110%, we had to opt out and not get any equity in future partnerships, but benefit from the legacy. And here I am, you think I'm a big deal because I was a partner of Benchmark. So it worked really well. I get to invest in the Benchmark partnerships, but I no longer get carried interest from them. So when I go to the office, my partners there all smile at me because I'm not taking up their equity. So we had to be conscious about making sure there was enough pie to be shared.
Yeah. And I also, in my defense, think you're a big deal because I actually use Wealthfront. So that's equally interesting thing. So when you're talking about investment strategy, and we'll get into Wealthfront in a couple of minutes, but when you're talking about investment strategy, I know it's hard to kind of like, disseminate it into like an idea that might be simple to explain. But like if you had to focus on kind of the most important thing when you were deciding, at Benchmark, what to invest in, what not to invest in, what did it like boil down to if it's possible to do that?
Well, it has evolved quite a bit. The firm is now 26 years old. So we started in 1995. And when we started, hardware was still a pretty significant part of the most successful companies. Right. And with hardware, intellectual property is a critical component. It's basically a case of if you really can build what you say you can, you know that the dogs are going to eat the dog food. So if you offer 10 times the performance or 10 times the storage or 1/10 the latency or 10 times the bandwidth. So it was always a question of could you really deliver it? And so back then, a big part of what we did was try to determine whether or not this entrepreneur who spins this phenomenal vision about what's possible as a result of an inflection point in technology, because without change, there's seldom opportunity. Could they really deliver on this? Was it possible? So it was really about evaluating the jockey. Fast forward to today, where everything is software-based, there's no technical risk. You can deliver it. The question is, does anyone want it? Right. So the way that the venture industry or the premier firms responded to this change is that market risk is what kills companies, not poor execution. So what they did was they basically said, without saying it, but they let the angel community take the market risk. And then they came in at a higher price once you've proven that the dogs want to eat the dog food.
Right.
So what's really fascinating about this is if 25 years ago we invested at a $5 million valuation, hoping the company could be worth 500, in which case we would make 20 or 30 times our money. It wasn't 100 times because of dilution from sharing all that equity. Fast forward to today, they might invest at a $50 million valuation after the market has been proven. But the markets are so much bigger because of the internet, the reach is so much greater that as many companies are worth 5 billion today as worth 500 million 25 years ago. And that's why the returns are no different, but the way that they invest. So today it's all about evaluating product market fit, which is a term I actually coined, but it's evaluating product market fit, not as much the people.
Right. And I literally was just about to ask you that, so it's a perfect transition. So I first heard about product market fit from Mark Andreessen and Paul Graham. And so when you were kind of coining that term, I'm just curious to see like what that actually means to you, in a sentence or a reasonably simple idea. Because the way I've heard it described is when instead of trying to push your product on someone, they pull it out of you, which I always thought was an interesting way to describe it.
So Mark, you might not know this, but I was on the board of Mark's last company, Opsware, and I actually helped them pivot into what became a very successful business as a result of the things that Mark and I were discussing that turned out to be product market fit. So Mark and I were on 3 boards together. We were very close. The idea, the concept behind product market fit actually was started by Don Valentine from Sequoia. So Don's perspective, and this was back in the 60s, Don's perspective was that startups are so under-resourced and so underfunded that if they can screw something up, they will. So the only way a startup can survive is if people grab the product out of their hands.
Yeah.
Which is the only way you can explain why a 25-year-old can run $1 billion business. They're not God's gift to management. It's that they happen to land upon an amazing product market fit. And if the market grows to be large and people are grabbing the product out of your hands, then you can be really, really successful. Yeah. So the more technical definition of product market fit is you've proven your value hypothesis, or people are desperate for your value proposition.
Right. Yeah. And so in today's day and age, right, let's say that, you were a starting entrepreneur all over again. What would be your process of testing product market fit in the most effective and efficient way? Because I've heard a lot of people, I had a girl who was a co-founder of scale.com, a multi-billion-dollar business. And she said when they were starting, they would literally create landing pages and they would run traffic to a variety of different landing pages with just a title and kind of what it was. And it didn't exist yet. And they would just test, right, the opt-in percentage on places like Product Hunt, running basic paid traffic and things like that. What are your thoughts on testing product market fit the most effective way in today's day and age with the internet?
So that's known as a smoke test, and that's a very effective way of doing it. I think that there are 2 different approaches, pre-MVP and post. Nothing is a substitute for getting a product into people's hands. And one of the biggest mistakes that people make is they think that if people don't want the minimum viable product, that adding more features will make it more attractive. Well, the most important thing is finding an audience that's desperate for what you do. So if people don't buy your MVP, you don't change the product, you change the market. You look for someone who might be desperate for what you do. I think that among the most productive ways of testing this is something known as a design sprint that was created by some designers at Google Ventures. And there is a phenomenal book on the subject called Sprint. Yep. The other book on the subject that does a great job in the pre-MVP mode is the lean startup, or 4 steps to the epiphany, on which the lean startup is based. So those are great processes. Those books describe phenomenal shortcuts in processes that can help you figure out whether or not people are desperate. Now, post shipping, there are actually some really good heuristics. So for a consumer company, it's, can you grow exponentially organically? Paid growth is can actually fake you out. It make you think that you have it when people might churn a lot. The only way that you get exponential organic growth is through word of mouth, and you can't get word of mouth unless people love you and are desperate for your product. On the enterprise side, every enterprise company has to do a proof of concept trial when it first gets started, and they typically limit these trials to 30 days. Well, one of the best techniques that I've seen used that I learned from a partner named Doug Leone at Sequoia Capital is you pull the trial after 30 days. No customer is ready to buy after 30 days. But if they're desperate and you pull it, they'll pay you. They'll scream, but they'll pay you. Now, if they don't scream and pay you, they were never going to pay you anyway. They just weren't desperate. So you really need to do that to figure out what's going on. Maybe, I think, is the worst word in the entrepreneurial language, because it's no with hope.
Yeah.
And you shouldn't have that hope. The other great technique I learned from one of my teaching partners at Stanford Graduate School of Business, Mark Leslie, who created a very successful company called Veritas Software. And basically what he found was that when an enterprise company sales team generates more contribution margin than it costs to field them, suddenly things take off. It means you found the recipe. So what I mean by that is, typically to sell an enterprise product, you have a direct salesperson. They might cost $250,000 all in with commission. They have a sales engineer who might cost $150,000. Then you might have a piece of an inside sales rep, and then you have management overhead. So all in, it costs $500,000 to $600,000 with T&E. Well, that means that the gross margin on the products they sell has to exceed $600,000 before you know you have the recipe. Right. And it's amazing how companies take off once they get to that sales yield greater than 1.
Yep. Yeah. And that's a perfect illustration. It's funny. I've actually read all the books you just mentioned. And there's another one that illustrates what you were just talking about. Mark Benioff, talking about Salesforce. And when he added in his like enterprise and commercial sales forces and started scaling it, and then noticed as he added more salespeople, they were generating more ultimate profit than they actually cost. And that becomes a beautiful scalable thing.
But the mistake that most people make is they say, I need $20 million to make my budget this year. A sales rep should do $1 million. I'm going to hire 20 sales reps out of the gate. And if they don't have the recipe, that's how most enterprise companies burn a lot of cash, because they ramp the sales force before they figured out the recipe that leads to the sales yield greater than 1.
Yeah. And so Benchmark and Wealthfront are very different. And we'll get into Wealthfront right after this last question. But what are the differences? Like, what can venture capitalists learn from entrepreneurs, and what can entrepreneurs learn from venture capitalists? Because you have a very unique position of having done both ultra successfully.
My teaching partner, Mark Leslie, used to say that he hated venture capitalists because he had a hard time financing the company, which went on to amazing success. Yeah. And so I killed him with kindness when we started teaching, to try to endear myself to him, because I knew how he felt about venture capitalists. But it made for an interesting dynamic to have a venture capitalist and a great operator teach a foundation course on tech entrepreneurship. Well, I remember when I started Wealthfront, he said, well, you would make such a better venture capitalist now. And I said, I couldn't disagree with you more. And he said, why? I said, because nothing that you do to become a very good operator is relevant to making a very good investment decision. It makes you a better board member. It actually makes you shut up more as a board member, because you have a greater appreciation for how the sausage is made. And so you don't try to impose your views on the management team. But in terms of finding and picking, being a good operator doesn't teach you any of those lessons. The only lesson that I brought with me from venture capital to running a business was a focus on slugging percentage and not batting average. So for those of your listeners who are not baseball fans, it doesn't matter the percentage of time you're correct. What matters is the magnitude of the success when you are correct. And if you try to be correct most of the time, the only way to do that is to take very little risk. And if you take very little risk, the magnitude of success is going to be very small. Whereas if you're willing to be wrong 8 times out of 10 to get the big magnitude wins on the 2, you're like, that's the only chance you have to become a big company. So that is a philosophy that I preach to everyone in our company.
Yeah. Yep. And so when you started Wealthfront, did you raise venture capital?
Yes.
Okay, so that
I believe in it. I really believe in it.
That says something, right? Because you're really showing that you believe in it. So it like boiled down to as simple as possible of an answer. Who is venture capital for and who is it not for, right?
Oh, sure. I'm happy to answer that. So venture capital is a pact with the devil. As an entrepreneur, you go to the devil and say, I want to build a really big company and I need a lot of capital to get there. I can't do it by bootstrapping. So you make this pact with the devil. It's not nearly as much of a pact with the devil today as it used to be 20 or 30 years ago. Yeah. And if the business fails and you've run out of ideas of how to grow the business, then you have to go to hell. So then the venture capitalist is going to try to bring in someone else who might have an idea. Now, that happens a lot less frequently than it used to happen 20 or 30 years ago. But so venture capital is really only appropriate for a company that has a chance to build a very big business. You don't want the frustration that you're going to get from the venture capitalist if you want to build a lifestyle business. That's the worst kind of company to raise venture capital from. In that case, you should beg, borrow, and steal and bootstrap and get friends and family money and really try to minimize the amount of capital that you need. But if you want to go big, you really can't do that without venture capital.
Yeah, no, exactly. And so with Wealthfront, did you know from the beginning that this was a big idea, or did you like kind of test it and create an MVP and then raise once you had product market fit? Like, what was that process like? I mean, you obviously have more experience than most people, so you can probably like skip certain steps maybe, or maybe you don't.
So I thought it was a big idea. I thought it had a chance to be a big idea because having observed the Penn Endowment and the way that they invest, and the premier university endowments are the best managed pools of capital in the world, and they all invest, similarly, I knew that we could deliver something if we did it in software that was an 80-20 of what the endowments do. And that would be radically better than what almost anyone has available to them. You know, for the 9 years that we've offered our service, we've compounded our clients' money pre-tax 9% a year. Now, that's not the 40% that you hear about on Robinhood, but if you actually look at the compounded rate over 9 years, I bet you less than 5% of individual investors have outperformed that really boring number. And when you add our tax savings from something we do in tax loss harvesting, it's even better. So over the years as a venture capitalist, many people had come to me after they had achieved financial success because their company had gone public or had been acquired, and they wanted investment advice. And I could never tell them to do what I do because I was in the incredibly fortunate position to be able to afford access to the absolute premier investment managers. And even with $1 to $5 million, they couldn't afford the minimums. So I thought, God, if we did this thing in software, we could lower the minimums to $500 and democratize access. So now I could actually give a great answer to all these people. And I thought it was a really big idea. Now, it took us 3.5 years to get to product market fit. So even though I teach a course on it at Stanford, it took us 3.5 years to really get to product market fit.
Yeah, and you have it, right? Because I mean, you know, you found me, and I needed that as well, and then I was like, this is great, and then I had to talk to you, and it's perfect, right? So last couple of questions. How do you personally invest in Wealthfront? Like, what are your settings? Reveal it. Like, do you go more risky? How do you consolidate? What are the things that you like to do? Just so, this is like from the CEO's lips himself. So everybody should listen to this, because I know a lot of my friends and a lot of listeners probably use Wealthfront.
So Kevin, forgive me, but that was the worst question you could ask me, because the whole point is you shouldn't choose the risk. We should evaluate what your tolerance for risk is.
Right.
And the reason why that matters is that there's a tremendous amount of research that's been done over 40 years that shows that individual investors consistently make the same mistake. And that is, they invest when the market goes up and they sell when the market goes down. And that costs them 1.5% to 3.5% a year. So there's a lot of research, academic research, on this subject. So if you increase your risk level, you're going to get a more volatile, you have more potential upside, but you're going to get a more volatile portfolio. Yep. And if you take a portfolio that's more volatile than you're comfortable with, unfortunately, you're likely to sell or withdraw at the exact wrong time. So it's a lot better to just go through our quiz and let us tell you what's appropriate than to have you pick. Now, all that being said, about 3 weeks ago, we introduced the ability to customize your portfolio. So we can't make people eat their broccoli. And we see way too many people day trading. I mean, this happens about every 10 years whenever the market goes up a lot in a short amount of time, and it never ends well. So they might do well on an absolute basis for a little while, and they really don't know what they're doing. You wouldn't think of picking up a scalpel and operating on your friend. Why would you think you can invest like a professional who's been trained over decades? I mean, this is a profession. Yeah. So that being said, what we did is we have changed Wealthfront so you can take our recommended portfolio, which we recommend, we think is best for you, or you can customize it. So if you don't want bonds in your portfolio, or you want more tech, or you want more socially responsible index funds, now you can do that, and we'll even allow you to we hope to allow you to even add cryptocurrencies at the end of the year. I'm not sure. I personally wouldn't recommend that you do that, but if that leads you to a more diversified portfolio, then we've actually helped you out.
Right. I love it. So the last question that we ask everybody on the podcast is, if you had a time machine, you could go back in time, but you only had enough time to say one thing to your 18-year-old self, and it could be about business, it could be about happiness, fulfillment, whatever you'd want to say. What would you tell 18-year-old Andy?
Oh God! Well, look, I've been unbelievably fortunate in my life and had a lot of really lucky breaks along the way. The only one that comes to mind is a professional piece of advice, and that would have been to embrace the concept of disruption as described by Clay Christensen in 1997. If I had understood that better, I could have been a lot better investor.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much, Andy. Seriously, if people want to learn more about you or reach out, if that's something that you enjoy hearing from entrepreneurs, or if you have like courses on Stanford Online or something like that, what's the best way for people to learn more about you? And then, of course, sign up for Wealthfront like I have.
Well, actually, if you want the first 5,000 managed for free, if you go to wealthfront.com/Andy, and sign up there, you'll get your first 5,000 managed for free. We have a blog at Wealthfront that I often write, so a lot of people find value in it. And I guess my Twitter handle is @Rachleff, so ARACHLEFF. Unfortunately, my Stanford courses aren't online because they're the case method, which really doesn't lend itself to video publishing.
Got it. Thank you so much, Andy. Seriously, you're so awesome. I really appreciate it. One of my favorite podcasts I've ever had. So I really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you very much.
Cool. Thanks, man. I seriously appreciate it.